Hello, and welcome to Conversations from the Alcove. My name is Caridad Svich, and I am the artistic director of the Lucille Lortel Theater's new play development program, which is called the Alcove. I'm a little bit glitchy right now, so maybe you can just hear my voice and see part of my image. I am beaming in technically from, for the purposes of this recording, from the land of Lenape. And I am wearing a blue and white striped top. I am fair skinned. My hair is auburn. It's to one side. It's kind of like in a ponytail to one side. I have bangs that are a little bit fluffy right now. I wear glasses. They're sort of cat eye, but not quite. Tortoiseshell rims, and I'm wearing red lipstick. And behind me is a virtual background of a well-appointed house with a couch, a piano, no less, a door, other sort of assorted nice living room things, and a view of a window on a sunny day. If at some point during the recording it glitches too much, I will revert to a blurred image. Which will be fine. On my other side of the screen is Amy Berryman, a wonderful playwright, screenwriter, actor, teaching artist, many triple, quadruple threats person, originally from Seattle by way of West Texas, and author of many wonderful plays, but among them, a terrific play called Walden, which was produced by Sonia Friedman Productions, directed by Ian Rickson, that premiered in London's West End in May 2021. Amy here at the Lortel is working on a new play for us, or shall I say a revisioning of a play that's been on her mind for quite some time. So welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much. That was a great introduction. I can also briefly audio describe that I have fair skin and dark hair, curly hair with also fluffy bangs, and I wear glasses, and I have sort of a red and white patterned shirt on today. So I'm so happy to be here with you and get to chat about plays and theater and the world. I'm very excited. This is very fun.
Indeed. Thank you so much for making time. As always, these chats are indeed about playwriting, art, and the world. Elements of craft weave in there, of course, because we're playwrights. We're a little bit geeky.
Big time,
in that regard. So forgive our geekiness if occasionally we go down that alley. But I've been starting all these conversations with a question about the climate crisis and how it's affecting, I can only imagine it is, affecting your art practice, your thinking about theater, and stuff like that.
Yes, great place to start. It's definitely been on my mind recently, and really has been for the past, I guess, since I started playwriting. I started as an actor. I love the theater. I kind of grew up in the theater. My dad is a writer and a sort of jack of all trades artist. Started as an actor, got exposed to new plays when doing a play at the new play development process at the Humana Festival when I was in a play there in 2015. And that plus just wanting more agency in my own work and starting to feel like I had a lot to say, I sort of put myself in a playwriting class and took off from there. And it just felt so much better to begin with. But I think that Walden, my play Walden in particular, did come out of my own climate anxiety. I mean, there were a lot of other questions in starting that play, but that was one for sure. I just kept thinking, what are we going to do? There's going to be a point where it gets too late to turn things around. And what are we going to do then? Like that was my very early understanding of, oh no, maybe we're screwed, and since then have really, in the process of writing that play, learned a lot more about the climate crisis, And then started writing my play, The New Galileos, the following year, which was around the time Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. So I guess just to say this question of climate and how to tell climate stories definitely is a part of my artistic process a lot of the time. Even a play that isn't necessarily a lot about it per se. Like, I just finished writing a play that is not about the climate crisis, but I'm starting to realize is about healing and is about like having the courage to try again when it feels impossible to heal further, which I think feels related to the climate crisis to me, that sometimes it feels so hopeless and scary, and yet we must keep trying and also pushing the powers that be, these bigger systems, to change is one of the many things that I feel about it. So just on a basic like art, sitting down at the blank page to write level, it is certainly something that I think about all the time. I am so interested in how to approach it, in what are the stories that people are connecting with versus just being turned off or it gets too overwhelming for them. I am interested in how do we call people in. And then on a practical level of, as the playwright, I don't always have the power around like all the makings of my plays, right? Like I don't always get to choose every detail about how a play is put on, but I feel very fortunate and in the people that I have worked with and been able to express that I would love for us to try to make this play in a way that feels in line with what the play is trying to say. In that on the West End, our scenic designer, Ray Smith, used all recycled materials for our set. The wood was from production of Uncle Vanya that Ian Rickson had done. The stars that were put at the end of the play as like a backdrop was from Girl from the North Country. So that was really a beautiful thing. And then my production at Theatre Works Hartford was literally outdoors in conversation with the environment around us. The lighting literally went from natural lighting to sunset, and then we used some other beautiful lighting design, but we would change, the theater would allow us to change the start time of the play so that we would get the sunset at the right time. So it was just a really beautiful, that was a very beautiful example. Also, just like the way the play is being put out into the world is supporting some of the questions and messages in the play. That production was directed by Man Teo. It's amazing. So I think that that's something I want to continue with going forward is, asking those questions. How do we make theater in a more sustainable way? And then also, like, I think I just feel very inspired by and challenged in a good way artists like Feinti Balogun, who I know, whose work we both love, who is in my play in London, who is just an incredible climate activist and artist. In his play, Can I Live, which is a hybrid theater and what's the word? Internet on screen and theater.
Transmedia. Yes,
transmedia. Yes. And it's just beautiful. And I think he really walks the walk as far as like just being a real activist. And I really feel inspired by and, aspire to be like him and like that. So those are all things that I have been thinking about as far as the climate crisis.
Yeah, I mean, I guess two things come to mind as piggyback to that, which is, have you ever entertained the idea of putting in your contract writer for a production that the work be ecologically sustainable?
I think that's a great idea. And I have not yet had the opportunity to, but I think that I would love to do that. It's one of those things that you don't think about, like I don't think about, I think about like choosing the people I work with thoughtfully in that way, who might be asking those questions before hiring a director or thinking about designers, thinking about who's producing it. But I think that's a really smart idea. I think that is sort of, it's interesting as we talk about like, so we're talking about all these things with contracts and the labor unions and everything, and how that kind of what's in a contract, it gives so much power, it holds so much power. So I think that's a great idea. I love that idea. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of, I mean, I'm just thinking of what are ways that we can actually ensure that when we're in the room with artists that we don't know.
Right. Because you don't always have the control, especially as a playwright. Your play goes out into the world and who knows who's going to do it, right? But
yeah, they may decide to do a very non-ecologically sustainable version, right?
Very true.
So yeah, I'm starting to put that in my, either in the script itself at the front or in contracts when I start talking with people. Mm-hmm. And just saying that this is a condition of doing the show. Yeah. And sometimes, there's been pushback, and sometimes there's been like, oh, let's figure it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. So that's really cool. So I love that idea.
There are ways that we can, us lowly writers,
yes,
that us lowly writers can affect the field, and how it moves forward. The other question that I had attached to that, which is has more to do with the form of what you're writing. So is there something about like the kinds of plays, the shapes of them, the way they move through time and space, speaking of time and space, a sort of crafty thing that I'm sneaking in there, of how that, if that's evolved in some way for you, or maybe you've had a shift in your perspective around that?
Well, it's so interesting. I love this question. I have to say that, speaking craft, related, the way I write is very, especially with plays, because I love that they can be whatever they want to be. Like you're saying, and I think your work reflects this as well, like very different forms. They don't have to be linear. They can be poetic. They can be anything, versus like when I'm working in the film TV world, things feel like there's a certain structure that there must be in some way. And so I sort of let the plays, I don't do a lot of outlining. I sometimes do imagine like sort of the form or the structure, but I also sort of let the play tell me as I'm going, which creates sometimes a much longer process to writing them. But so I've noticed that my work tends to fall into this like contained space that has some form of naturalism, some form of linear storytelling. And then there's at least one pocket or several pockets of bursting into some other space or time, like the very end of the play in Walden, when the sisters are far apart. In this play that I just wrote, which is about psychedelic therapy, we get to actually see a mushroom trip on stage. So that's kind of blasts us into another space and time. And so that's been something I've just noticed that I haven't necessarily done purposefully. Although with this play I just wrote about the psychedelic therapy, that I did consciously do that. But I guess what interests me is breaking forms in, and I love work like Sarah Kane. I feel like maybe you and I both talked about that a little bit, or just feeling very inspired by her and her sort of in your face ferocity, and just sort of the breaking of that sort of traditional form in the climate crisis, because I think what we're going to have to do, and by we, I mean, of course, individually, but like on a larger scale, is think outside of the box, think differently. And I think that theater can support those sorts of structures. But that being said, sometimes my plays do have minds of their own. So I sometimes start with one thing and then it ends up being, you know, this other thing. So I really do sort of let them be what they want to be. And I even like teach a playwriting class that I started teaching just for actors, but now I'm trying to teach for, you know, anybody who's interested. That way of just sort of trusting, feeling your way through versus doing a lot of outlining and planning beforehand, which is great for so many people. And I think more power to them. And I think there's something really fun about going into the play in that way and just letting the characters, listening to the characters, letting them tell you where they want to go, what their story is, in sort of a woo-woo kind of way. So
yeah, absolutely.
A long-winded answer, but
no, not at all. I mean, I guess it just makes me think about how plays, yeah, they do have a life of their own if you can trust them. And I think this question of trust in the writing process is a tricky one because I don't know about you, Amy, but I feel like maybe sometimes there's I call it sometimes the voice of the marketplace that is on your shoulder. You're writing, you're sort of trusting, you're being all like whatever, all genuine and all those things. And then there's a part of you that's going, wait a minute, but what would this do in the marketplace? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, that can be a very dangerous, sometimes it's helpful, but it also can be a very dangerous thing because it interferes with what you're after. And I guess I wonder how you sit with that. And maybe this leads to one of the other questions that I was going to ask you, which is a more long question, but having to do with, you know, there's this facetious thing in our field where people say, you know, you send a play somewhere or you give it to someone and the first thing, well, why now? Why is this play happening now?
Yeah.
And you're like, well, because it needs to happen, whatever. So, but of course, getting a play on, very rarely, I mean, 1 in a million, really, do you write something and then like 6 months later it's on? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
That does happen on occasion, and it's wonderful when it does. But most of the time, I mean, I was just talking to a writer yesterday. They had their first reading of the play in 2005, and then their world premiere was in 2022.
Oh my God.
Right? Like what? Right? You know, and had like readings, development, like readings and workshops and readings and what. And so the why now question becomes a little bit tricky when we're in a field that, I mean, I'll give you another example. I was talking to a theater and they said, oh, we're programmed for the next 5 years. And I was like, well,
sounds like you know what's going to happen, don't you? You sounds like you know exactly what we're going to need. What we're going to need in 3 years. Sounds like they know. So maybe we should talk to them about what's going to happen. Oh my God.
Maybe they have a crystal ball. So they have the crystal ball. So I guess there's this lag between the making of the thing and the thing that an audience sort of experiences, right? The event that the audience experiences. And I guess how you wrestle with that, both at the table, and maybe you don't think about it. I don't know. Everybody works differently. Or what happens for you in that time period where you're living with the play, but it has not yet reached fruition. How do you kind of navigate that as a writer?
That's such a great question, and it's so it's just so true. The why now? Well, now is 5 years from now. I think about this a lot and come up against it sometimes with like producers who think that they know that, like you're saying, that they know what's going to happen. Like, we have no idea what's going to happen, what we're going to need several years from now. So I think really, honestly, I try to listen to the kinds of ideas, sparks, inspirations that I can't let go of. And those feel important, that I personally am the one to write them, that I'm the one to carry them forward into the world. And if I can't let go of them, I think that feels like a good why now for me. A question, an idea, a character. I think if I think about it too much, the marketplace in particular, I kind of can't write. Like it sort of just becomes too much, too pressureful for me. I do try to think about things like, I guess the only thing that does come in sometimes is cast size. I do think about that. I think about, I think Walden was a great example. And in fact, when I got the call from about that Sonia Friedman wanted to do it, I really convinced myself it's because it's a 3-character play with 1 set. That's the only reason why she likes it. I was just like so blown away by the whole thing. But I do think that I understand the attractive nature of a smaller play, particularly right now. That being said, The Wolves by Sarah DeLapp is one of the most produced plays in the country right now, so I think, and that has a lot of characters. So I think that isn't necessarily advice I would give anyone. I try to tell people, like, just write the thing you need to write. Really try to follow what interests you, what you like, what's speaking to you, what you have questions about, because I think that's what and trusting that. Trust, I think, like you said, that element of trusting the play, because I think that for me, so much of actually being able to sit down and write is quieting all these voices that are in my head that are like, no one cares about this. Why would you ever sit down and write anything? No one cares. So if I listen to no one will ever produce this is unproducible, I probably won't write it. And I guess the thing I also try to comfort myself with is, even if it doesn't get produced, it is still this piece of writing that I care about, that I can share with people, that I can grow and make better. And then the other element of like the why now in theater that I when this kind of, maybe we'll talk about this more later, but I used to be a part of this really great little theater company called Amios, that did like this monthly pressure cooker event called Shots, SHOTZ, where you basically this was probably like 2016 through the 2020. As a playwright, you would get like assigned a little handful of actors and a director. You'd write a 7-minute play write for 2 weeks, rehearse it for 2 weeks, put it up at the end of the month at the Crane Theater. It was very silly. A lot of the plays were fun, silly, goofy, and others were like very deep and meaningful, but you actually saw your play up there in front of an audience. It was a production, and I learned a lot from that. I learned a lot from quickly writing something, seeing the response, getting feedback. And that is the kind of thing I would wish for like newer writers to be able to get to experience, because it really did help it aided in my growth as a writer immensely, getting to actually see the thing up on its feet. And with Walden, I saw it in front of so many music stands for so long, as we all do. We see all these reading after reading, and you get to a point you're like, I've learned all I can do. I've learned everything from these readings. Now it needs to take the next step. And sometimes we get that next step and sometimes we don't. But I do think that is such an important element of theater. And I feel so lucky and that I've gotten to have the production experiences that I've had, because the amount of growth, that I experienced during those times was exponential. It's like so much learning, so much fear to overcome, like just sort of thrown into the fire and see if I survive. But yeah, it is a real issue. I think it also is true in film and television, honestly, because these things take so long to make, and you get so lucky if you're hitting the moment right at the right time. But, if you allow your plays to also be about these bigger themes and issues and really start to like zero in on what those bigger themes might be, those continue to resonate, I think. If you are writing from a deep place, even if that's like deeply funny place, because we also need that, right? We need humor to survive this time. Yeah, those are all things I think. But I really, to kind of more succinctly answer your question, I kind of try not to think about it as much as I can, or I just try to really be firm with myself that I will not finish this play if I tell myself that maybe it won't go, or maybe it won't ever see the light of day, or no one will produce it. Like, those are all voices that do get the better of me sometimes, honestly. Like, there are some plays, that they haven't been finished, or they're still waiting to be finished. And that's probably part of it. But yeah, it is a really interesting question that does feel so impossible when you're answering those applications where you're like, why now? Why this play now? Well, yeah. So
because I need to write it, often with those applications, I just feel like, just give me the money and trust me, I will finish the play. Do you know what I mean? It's what I want to say to them. It's like, it will happen if you just like trust me on this end to make it happen. But there's a lot of justification of the writing, just as there is a lot of justification of art in general, especially in the United States, because we're in a country where there's no art subsidy. So the arts are constantly having to prove that they're worthy of being supported, that they are necessary in culture, that which is I think I often think what it would be like to be in a country like Germany, where they literally just gave I don't know how many euros just for the city of Berlin, to go, this is funding for this year, and I'm just like, what the kind of freedom that gives you as an artist to go, where I live cares about what I do. You know what I mean? And so therefore, I don't have to spend 50% of my time justifying why I need to exist. I can actually use that energy toward making the work, or dreaming new things, or whatever, you know what I mean? And so I feel like we're in this very strange place, and fiscally and sort of in the larger theater landscape in the U.S., of on the one hand, constantly having to justify ourselves, on the other hand, especially in the regional theater model, which actually didn't start out that way, but has turned out that way over time, the regional theater model deciding that they need to rely on revenue, right? The revenue being box office, right? So as people say callously, butts in seats, right? And I well, of course, that's a little bit that goes back to this idea of theater being a consumerist, part of the consumerist chain, right? So that in a sense, its only value exists within a capitalist framework,
right?
But this might just be me. It just be me, but I think that theater is anti-capital. I think that theater actually, its value, in quotation marks, is what cannot be quantified.
Yes.
And so it's a conundrum, I think, of our art form, that in capitalist systems, again, looking at the U.S. just as one example, we're having to quantify it constantly to make something that is ultimately unquantifiable. To be honest, I mean, there are versions of this in the commercial world where I can think of Back to the Future, the musical, just opened on Broadway, and I'm sure that everybody on board with that was like, it's going to be a hit because Back to the Future. I could also say that could not be the case, right? You can go into a project like that thinking known property, people will love it, and then they may not. They may not love it. So there's no real guarantee. I think that sometimes this gets confused, even in commercial conversations around work, that the IP is going to totally sell it, when in fact it may not. A lot of that has to do with the zeitgeist too, like when it hits and
Yes.
like how it hits and like which audience does it reach and when does it open and all those things. And within a world that is volatile to say the least, wildfires, floods, et cetera. How are you going to even predict, right?
Right.
So, like, where people are going to be emotionally? Will they even have what some people call disposable income, right? Which is a luxury, right?
Right.
So to go to the theater or to experience theater in their home or however they're experiencing it. So I guess, my very long-winded question has to do with the state of the field and like as cultural workers in it,
Mhm.
um, how do you see your path? And also, um, I know there's only so much we can do as artists, but I guess I just wonder about like a larger picture of how you sort of look at where we're at, where we might be going, um, and yeah, and how to create, I think, holistic change. You know.
I wish I knew. I think everything you're saying is so dead on. I completely agree. I love, and I do really believe that the value is unquantifiable. It has been in my life, and I know it has been in so many other people's lives. I think that, I would love for us to live in a country where theater was subsidized, that there was more support from the government and more acknowledgement from the government that that it does have this value, that artists have this value, even in the pandemic, the still ongoing pandemic, but during lockdown in particular, everyone looked to artists, everyone looked to art, to their favorite TV shows, to ways that they could connect via artists. And it is so upsetting and strange to see the landscape of the theater at the moment. And I guess I think, like I'm in the writers group at Center Theater Group, which just had such an intense, had to cancel most of the Mark Taper Forum season. And that's one of the biggest theaters in the country as far as like their budget and everything. And that's just been sort of a warning bell, I think, to a lot of other regional theaters. And just, I think I really don't know what will change or how to change it, except I guess to imagine sort of a radical reimagining of what theater can be. And also I think, like you said, how much can we do as artists? But I also think that artists starting to take over theaters, artists starting to step up to the plate to reimagine in these leadership positions, I think could be really positive versus trying to come at it from like a business perspective. Like I think artists at least can imagine new ways of doing things. But I think my real answer is I have no idea how to fix it or how to change, except to continue talking about it, to continue pointing out what's wrong and pointing to examples of things working. Like I think like sort of transmedia, like we talked about, sharing theater electronically, like not being afraid of live streaming theater to make it more accessible to people, I think is one way that theater in the US feels very behind in that area, that I think that's something that could both like engage a new generation of folks to get interested in the theater and yeah, just make it more accessible in so many different ways. But I don't know. I think that I just agree that with everything you said, that capitalism is really messing everything up, including back to our first question about the climate. Like it just feels very, all those things feel very interconnected. I completely agree with you that we don't know what the future holds. And so it's hard to know what is going to hit the public. I think I keep thinking about like in Station 11, did you watch that show? Station
I
11?
did, yeah.
That production of Hamlet and just like theater after the apocalypse or something. Like I don't know that I write those sorts of the kinds of plays that can be done just like with absolutely no lights or sound or anything, but I'm kind of drawn to them right now, that like just the idea that theater is one thing that will likely live on through whatever is to come, and to see an example in that show and in that book of theater continuing on after like a real dissolution of civilization as we know it. I think it does feel like the kind of thing that is going to continue on. And anyway, I've been thinking about that production of Hamlet a lot from that show. But
totally. Yeah. So I'm just going to tell our viewers when they view this that I'm glitching a little bit, so forgive me for the glitching. Hopefully you can still hear me. So I guess, to follow up with that, I will say that, I'm thinking a little bit about how we can adapt and evolve, So one of those has to do with, streaming, and obviously, and, which, it's ironic, I often tell people, colleagues and such, that it's the musical theater geeks that are going to save the theater.
Yes.
Because they really are, like, they're watching the bootleg, on YouTube, and they're like, you know what I mean? They're fervent, and they're real fans, and they really like, they are eager to see the work, but they also want to, they also want to stream it, and they also want, and I feel like I want that energy to carry over into what people call straight plays. You know what I mean? It's like, and I think a little bit about, there was this program, I understand, maybe it was in the 50s, called Playhouse 90. I've been reading about, it was on TV, and they would just do plays, basically.
Oh my God, cool.
It was live broadcasts of plays, so like, Clifford Odets and like, people like that did plays for Playhouse 90. And there might be some that you can still see, I think, at the Museum of Television and Broadcasting, some of those archival recordings. But I think that's a way to make people literally understand what we do.
Yeah.
Like, because I think that, I jokingly posted the other day on the app that used to be called the Bird app. I still call it the Bird app, but anyway, on the former Bird app, that, like, even in pedagogy, right? So you're teaching about theater, and you're referencing a play, and then the students are like, "I want to see it," and you're like, "Oops, sorry."
Right.
There's no way you can see it. Like, and I'm like, literally, we're in the 21st century. We actually could do this. It's not like, oh, you can't see Euripides' version of Medea, because there's no way we'd go back to the ancient time. So I feel like there's also an opportunity for, like, for training students to understand, like, oh, look, that's what this could look like. You may or may not agree with it. You know what I mean? You can discuss the choices made in the production, but you're like, but that's how it looks like on its feet, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it teaches you something also about, like, performance in the theater, and design, and all those things, So, and I was thinking about, coincidentally, about the film recording, the hybrid sort of version of Walden.
Yeah.
And how that came to be, and also, because that exists on its own terms, I think, but it's also like a record of that experience. So what was that like for you, and making that happen?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm not sure, because I'm lucky enough to have two, actually. I have the West End one, and then I have the TheaterWorks Hartford. The West End production was captured, like, in a really beautiful high-end kind of way. which they wanted to do. That was always kind of part of the idea of the festival, the Reemerge season that Sonia Friedman put together, was that they were going to be filmed, and then originally it was going to be like on the BBC or something crazy, but it was on Sky over there. And I think at some point it'll end up somewhere in the US, but I don't know when or how. And I can't tell you like how grateful I am for that video. Like it does. I mean, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It's like just that it was crazy that when they filmed it, there were like all these cameras and several different angles, and it's interesting too because it sort of captures a weird moment because they filmed it before we opened because COVID was so wild. It was like so wild then, and still is, but like at that time we were like, hope we can make it. And we did, we had tons of protocols in place and everything, but obviously still things happen. And we didn't lose a single show. So lucky in that way, but they filmed it before they ever had an audience. So like, I don't even know that the actors knew that the play was as funny as it can be, so it's very interesting. Like I changed a few lines after that, so it's very interesting little captured moment in time. But I feel so grateful for that. And I wish for that for all playwrights, like to have that documentation of your work, like how incredible, how beautiful. It does capture the sense of the stagecraft and the production. It doesn't feel like it's not a play. And then the recording of the Hartford production is also beautiful in its own way. It's not the same like high quality filming, but it does capture a sense of like just the expansiveness of that production, I guess. And I also feel so fortunate, to have that as well. And that people got to see it that couldn't be there. I mean, that's also such a huge element of it. And if the Walden film of London is released in the US, like more people will get to see that. I don't remember what the original question was, but I just feel so lucky. Totally. That's why I also think like I think it's not something that I'm super able to share with people, but I guess it's like as a playwright, your work is only, you only can get to so many people. I think that's why so many writers do want to write for TV and film, because their work is exposed to so many more people. They get to reach so many more people. And so I think in this way, theater can reach more people, to your point. And I think also from an education standpoint, I would die to get to see some of those productions, so many Broadway productions I didn't get to go to because I couldn't afford it, even though I lived in New York. And I do think that trying to harness the level of fervor that musical theater fans have is, I think, a great strategy. If we can figure
them. We need like play groupies, you know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
That really follow the work and, or can become obsessed with it and like all those things. I mean, I feel like sometimes that happens with what I call event theater pieces, you know what I mean? I was thinking about, and maybe because it was also recorded, although that's a very different kind of recording, but in and of itself, Derek Delgaudio, illusionist, theater.
Yes, that was a beautiful piece.
Gorgeous.
Yes.
Absolutely gorgeous. But it had an incredible following. Like, people were obsessed with it, right? For good reason. It's amazing and very profound, actually, very, very moving piece. But also the illusions are incredible. And I thought, I love this. I love this kind of, and I know that not all plays can do that, but I felt like there's something around, people often talk about the specialness of theater, you know what I mean? The live, all of that. And I'm like, well, that's a situation where it did feel special. Like it felt like gosh, I don't know. And then somebody's going to walk away with a book. And then,
Right.
what are they going to write in the book? You know what I mean? Like, there was this kind of, I think what was cool about that is that he built into that piece elements of chance and surprise.
Yeah.
That then created buzz around the piece itself. Do you know what I mean? And so I thought, oh, I want plays to have that feeling about them, even if it's a simmering feeling and not always, high octane, but,
Right.
Because I think that it also this thing of revisiting plays. Like, I remember I did a show in Atlanta some years ago, a play of mine, and I purposefully was like, I want groupies. Like, I want people to not figure it out. Do you know what I mean? Like, I built it so that you'd have to come back.
Right.
And try to figure it out. You know what I mean?
Brilliant.
And I was like, and I think that that's one way of getting audiences, if they connect to the work, of course, but to be like, oh, I need to see it again because I want to know how to, you know what I mean? Or sometimes it's a piece of stage business or whatever.
Right.
So I think there's a way of creating buzz around the work. Again, that could be subtle or it could be more, ostentatious. That can drive audiences to the beauty of what we do, which I think is an ancient form. It's oral storytelling, basically.
Yes.
And it's like, here we are around the campfire, telling the stories. And also it's a tradition of passing things down, right? So that the idea of, the production happens, it's seen, maybe it gets done somewhere else. There's something very moving about second, third, and fourth production. You know what I mean? Because those actors are like, I am now giving this role to you. And then that actor's like, and I am giving it to you. And then sometimes those actors get together and like, I was so-and-so in that play. I too was so-and-so in that play. There's a kind of like passing down of the work that is akin, I think, to oral storytelling. Even just from the practitioner's perspective, shared, like all the people that have ever played Hamlet, or all the people that have ever played Richard III, or you know what I mean? Like, they share, they're part of a club. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, know, and it's a real thing. Like, they've memorized those lines. They've like been inside of that text. They've wrestled with maybe some of the same questions. So I think there's also that sort of beauty about what we do. There was there's a website called the Theater Times, which focuses on theater internationally. And they have a online theater festival that they do, hopefully every year, but we'll see. But they've done it for the last 3 years. And this year they did it, and they had 5 productions of the same play.
Wow.
But they were in different, countries.
That's so cool.
And I was like, yeah, it was the same. Like, the play itself the text didn't change, other than it was translated into a different language. But it was fascinating to see, oh, this is how the Croatian company did it, and this is how the Belgian company did it, and this is like, and it was like, that was like, that's such a cool thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, and also I'm thinking, like, that's such a gorgeous thing that we can also offer in the world of streaming, where it's like, you can see that iteration and that iteration, and then you can sort of look at like how different artists sort of approach the work. Like, literally how we do with all the film Shakespeares that there are in the universe. Like, we're like, you know what I mean? There's so many of them, right? And it's like, you can actually see, like, even like stylistically, I call them sort of like acting mannerisms of a time, for example. Oh, that's a 1980s Shakespeare. I can totally tell.
Yes.
Oh, that's the 1990s, like, actor training thing. You know what I mean? There's a kind of like also the beauty of like recording of theater history itself and theater practices inside of like the filming of work, which I think, I'm very keen on, obviously. And also there's many different ways around it, including live streaming work and doing interactive work. It doesn't always have to be a recording capture. I do want to say that actually Walden is available.
Oh,
For educators though.
Yes.
So,
Okay. Good. Good.
So I'll do a little shout out. So any educators that are at a university that subscribes to the very wonderful shout out collection from Bloomsbury Drama
Yes.
Online, the Drama Online collection, which is stellar, by the way. It's just so beautifully curated. And in their collections, they have wonderful plays, but also if you're at universities, Digital Theater Plus is another sort of longstanding subscription-based model. There's Digital Theater, which is one where you can rent stuff if you're a regular subscriber, or not a subscriber if you just want to rent something. But then there's Digital Theater Plus, which is for educational purposes only, and it's offered to universities as a package.
I love that.
In that package, you can see Walden. So if your university subscribes to Digital Theater Plus, you can see Amy's recording of the London version of Walden, so beautifully rendered. So shout out.
Thank
for
you.
Digital
Thank
Theater
you for
Plus.
the shout out. Yeah.
Yay. They're wonderful people. And also a shout out to Bloomsbury, because I think both of those are, in terms of the university market, just offering such an incredible, range. It's such an incredible resource, to be honest, of like work that otherwise you would not be able to have access to, including Digital Theater Plus has a whole section on experimental dance work.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And there's no other way to see it. Do you know what I mean? There's just isn't.
Right.
So it's like, thank you, the gods.
Yes.
thank the gods. Thanks to people that believe. We're at time. I wanted to thank you so much, Amy, for making time with us today and to being part of the conversation from the Alcove and to working on your work here at the Lortel and in the development program. And it's such a beautiful thing. For those of you that are out there in the universe, thanks for checking in. If you're checking in, this is a series. We're starting small, but hopefully it will grow, of conversations with artists, particularly playwrights. So check us out on the YouTube channel at the Lortel. I am going to hit end recording and say my goodbyes, but then I will stay on the line and chat with Amy on the back end. So yay, thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Yay, thanks for being here.